Hi, my name is Hayley Burns, and I am doing the How Gender Affects Learning in K through 12 settings for our diversity project. And I'll be summarizing the 5 articles that I researched for gender in the classroom. All right. So my first one, the article is titled "The Myth of Pink and Blue Brain," and basically, this article is debunking the idea that there is a fundamental biological difference between male and female brain, which seems obvious, I feel like, in this day and age, but there's still a lot of stereotypes that exist because of this thought that there is a difference fundamentally between the two. So this article mentions how neuroscientists have identified very few reliable differences between a male and a female brain. They say that although male brains tend to be 10% larger and finish growing a year or two later, this has everything to do with physical maturity and nothing to do with mental development. So, So basically, this is putting all of the gender differences that we learn on stereotypes rather than biology. So stereotypes in the classroom create these gender gaps. You know, the idea that like boys will be better at math and science while girls pursue writing or careers in other directions. And that creates these actual gaps in academics where women tend to fall behind in the subjects like math and science. And that's not due to a biological difference, it is due to these societal and cultural impacts. And this article goes on to explain how this starts in early childhood development, like through major things such as playing, as we studied a little bit under Vygotsky, and he talks about early childhood cognitive development, how that happens through play, and they go on to say that the three major differences we see when boys and girls play is that, and how this play will affect them through their schooling. So we see that boys are modestly more physically active and they have more of a spatial awareness, while girls play games where they're talkative, so they, on average, talk 1 month earlier than boys do. This article says that since boys usually, when we talk about gender, I feel like a lot of it's boys, girls, and it's kind of this, we lump it all into these two things, even though learning that gender, is non-binary, and so that gender is non-binary, and so but we still do a lot of generalizations. We talk about gender, and so anyway, back to the research. So it says when boys, they play more games where they're where they're catching or throwing. So this will lead to early development in their spatial awareness. They have to learn like orientation and distances, which they'll have an earlier advantage when they are learning math or science because they kind of already built these foundations based off of these games that they've played when they're younger, while girls will spend more time talking and they'll play more games where their role playing is based in relational ways. So they have kind of the foundations for phonological awareness, and that's why they're able to learn reading a little bit quicker and a little bit easier, which this article then sums up to say that culture, attitudes, and practices influence boy-girl academic gaps far more than biological differences. Which then in my next research, it goes on to kind of help that in a study that a student at the University of Minnesota she kind of furthered this idea and wanted to see if really the divergent thinking of males is more the divergent thinking of males is superior to that of girls, which divergent thinking we've learned about is the ability to come up with multiple solutions to a problem. So in this study, the question being posed is, are there gender differences in fluency, flexibility, or originality of response? Which all those categories all fall under divergent thinking, because fluency is the number of responses you can come up with, while flexibility is the ability to change your mindset, so you're not, for every answer, coming up with the same type of category, but you're coming up with different categories for the answer. And originality, which is the measured by the frequency of uncommon yet appropriate responses. So this survey was done by 166 public school students, and they were in grades 8 and 11th. And they were asked different questions based on 3 different categories to figure out if the divergent thinking was different between the genders. So the first category, they had to answer similarities. So they had to come up in the allotted time with the similarities between like an apple and a bar of chocolate. And then next category they did was uses. So they had to write all of the answers they could think of to the uses of a brick. And then they did instances, where they had to write of all the things they could think of that are fast. And so then these answers were judged by a panel of 3 judges on a scale of 1 to 5. And then they took the average of those answers, and they found out that there really is no difference between a male and a female's answer to these questions. So therefore, it's in a classroom setting, the idea that men should pursue math and science related careers compared to women is not a fair and not a scientifically proven. It's study. Okay. So this next research article is titled Teachers and Administrative Perceptions of Gender in the Classroom. And this is another study done, but instead of studying students, the people researching studied teachers and administration. In Midwestern schools, they questioned 44 different staff members. They asked them that if you had a classroom or a school of all boys or all girls, would you approach that change from your current environment? And this question they asked because they were trying to figure out, they didn't want to pose the question in a way that the staff would view it as like a focused on how they treat different genders. They wanted, because if they asked it in that way, then they would get answers that you would want to hear, rather than how those teachers actually are perceiving genders within the classroom and how that's affecting the academics and learning abilities. So what they found was that there was a major gender bias among most of the staff, that some of them said they wouldn't change any of their curriculum, but most of them said they would. They primarily talked about how they would change it for boys, saying they would have more hands-on or physical activities, but most of them didn't really change it for girls, which we could assume then that how schools are set up right now, teachers think that it's benefiting the way girls learn better than the way boys typically learn, based off of, like, based off of these stereotypes and these social norms that aren't really based off of scientific or biological evidence, which the gender bias in a classroom, then, if these teachers are viewing such differences in the ways that they learn and what the kids and the best way they can learn, creates these gender biases which have negative impacts in the classroom, because this contributes to exclusion and it prohibits students from reaching their full potential if the idea that they should just follow one path because they're a girl or a boy is reinforced over and over again throughout their schooling. Then they will stick with that path and they won't feel the want to figure something else out because this is what their teachers and staff are telling them to do. So then the next bit of research is titled "The Gender Integration and the Promotion of Inclusive Classroom Climates." And this article is researching the ways in which segregating children by genders in classrooms, the negative impacts those have on learning, and the positive effects of integrating genders and not being so focused on genders. Like, how they talk about the negative side effects of how teachers will make gender prominent thing in class, like line up boys, girls, and boys versus girls in the games, and how this reinforces the segregation and stereotypes. And it allows the kids then to stay in their own gender bubble. They call it their gender segregation cycle. So it's the idea that if you stay within your gender and your teacher is reinforcing you to stay in your gender, then you will only stay in this in-group and you won't learn about the out-group, and you become, you become biased against the out-group and you create these negative stereotypes of them because you become so close with this group and you think that you are the dominant and the best group, and you don't try to broaden that and go to other groups. Then it kind of creates that out-group atmosphere. And that's negative in classrooms because it says that encourages sexism and rates of aggression in classrooms, actually, if classrooms are very gender segregated. And then the article goes on to give ideas in ways that you can integrate classrooms and the positive effects that they have on here. So they have an intergroup contact theory, which says that the attitude towards outgroups can be improved when you integrate the groups. And once you integrate them, then you become more involved with people who are in a different perspective and can give you different ways to find answers and ways to come up with solutions to problems. And it creates common goals, it says, and equal statuses of groups, which is positive for the classroom learning environment. And then the last article of research I did is titled "Rethinking Conventions, Keeping Gender Diverse Students Safe." And this article talks about a situation in which a student was coming to kindergarten the next year, and they were a gender non-conforming student, and the principal at the school hadn't had that happen before, and so they took it upon themselves to educate themselves and learn what they could about non-conforming student coming to school, and ways in which they could create a safe environment for this kid, for the student, so that they would be able to learn to the best of their ability and they wouldn't be hindered by their gender like we see often in classrooms. So the teacher then educated the staff, and they were strict on enforcing environments in which they were accepting and able to create a level of safety and comfort for the student to come to school and learn appropriately in ways in which they taught the students to be able to do the same. So, in conclusion, I would say that after research that I've done on gender and how it affects learning in the classroom, I would say that mostly all of the ways in which students are negatively impacted come from societal and environmental factors that infringe their ability to pursue maybe the highest levels or which subjects they would like to study because of ideas that aren't scientifically proven.